Ground Zero. Today, every first world citizen knows what this is, but this looked like this back in 1914. Western Union, the company we know today for facilitating transfers to underbanked people overseas, actually created America's first version of the credit card as a way to defer payments on bills. Then in 1920, the oil companies, especially Texaco, and department stores like the Martson Group got in on the action. And by 1928, the Farrington Manufacturing Company trademarked the charge-up plates, which were embossed with the customer's name, city, and state. These were primarily used by large merchants within their store network for the next 20 years. When 1946 came around, a New York banker by the name John Biggins created Charge It, a system that worked very similar to today's modern payment system, except with a major limitation. It lacked the ability to scale and was limited to a 2-block radius of the bank. 3 years later, Frank X. McNamara, along with his business partner Ralph Snyder, created the Diners Club Group. It was the first charge card that was accepted by multiple merchants outside of a single geographic area. In its first year, 10,000 people signed up, and in just a decade, this number ballooned to 1 million. The meteoric success of the Diners Club card kicked off the race for banks and financial players to fight for their share to enslave us all. This is a story of how consumers partially won, but also unknowingly became addicted to debt. Competition heating up. In 1958, American Express and Bank of America wanted in on the action and launched their competing credit programs. Bank of America on September 18th dropped 60,000 unsolicited paper Bank of America cards into the mailboxes of Fresno, California residents. Amex a year later became the first to upgrade paper cards to plastic. B of A soon followed and converted to plastic as well, but gave their cardholders between $300 and $500 spending limits with the ability to carry a balance month to month for a fee. Amex remained a charge card, which means credit card holders were required to pay off their debts every month. B of A's Joseph P. Williams, the man who was instrumental in the mail drop-in experiment, continued to expand the mailing campaign to more and more neighboring cities within California, prematurely, just off of a rumor that a competitor was about to attempt a similar experiment. Within 15 months, B of A had issued 2 million credit cards and onboarded 20,000 merchants, which resulted in the competitor never going through with their launch. Scaling so quickly revealed fundamental miscalculations of the risk Joseph was taking. Delinquent accounts were not 4%, they were 22%. No collections department was set up because he didn't think there would be a need for one. Fraud, especially in LA, was costing millions. Large merchants didn't cave in because they had their own credit card programs and resented the idea of paying 6% to Bank of America. The result was an $8.8 million loss, but when you account for advertising and overhead, the real loss was near $20 million, which was a huge sum of money in the 1950s for any bank to swallow. B of A's reputation took a hit from customers, politicians, and local newspapers, which led to Joseph resigning. B of A's CEO Clark Beise recognized that every conceivable mistake had already been made, so instead of dismantling the credit card program, he worked to set up a managing committee. They moved everyone that was close to the credit card launch as far away from the credit card department as possible. They brought in installment credit thinking to the management of credit cards. They set up an effective collections and anti-fraud unit. They closed credit accounts from people who had no intention of paying the money back and wrote off the losses. They enticed merchants by lowering the fees from 6% to 3%. They then wrote an open letter to nearly 3 million customers with an apologetic yet sales pitch tone. It read in part, "As for its encouraging extravagance, it seems to us that this is a problem which every individual must resolve for himself. Only you can determine to what extent your income and circumstances permit you to buy on credit. It is not our intention to encourage easy money or a free spending program. In fact, we believe our job is to assist you in any way possible to maintain sound and sensible control of your finances." By the end of 1961, Bank of America turned a profit with 233,585 active cards with $28 million worth of debt on the books, which resulted in profits of $179,000. By 1968, there was over 1 million cards being used with $252 million worth of debt on the books, which resulted in $12.7 million in profits. The profits were becoming too hard to hide, and fierce competitors began to emerge, this time on the East Coast. In 1967, Chase Manhattan Bank held a meeting with other banks in Buffalo, New York. This meeting formed the Interbank Card Association, ICA, which would later be called MasterCharge. In 1969, Citibank's Everything card adopted the MasterCharge Interbank logo, which would give a huge boost of confidence to the network. By 1976, Bank of America spinned off into what is today known as Visa, and just 3 years later, in 1979, MasterCharge was renamed MasterCard. How the law made it possible for credit cards to enslave you. Following the aftermath of the initial Bank Americard credit card launch fiasco, Martin J. Mayer, a journalist, wrote, "The credit card has introduced a new kind of addiction, debt addiction." Up until 1982, most states had a law or regulation that prevented interest rates from being raised. The governor of South Dakota, Bill Janklow, lifted those regulations to bring much-needed jobs to his state. Citibank was one of the first big banks to set up a meeting and committed to providing 400 high-paying jobs. A year later, Delaware did the same. Because the Supreme Court had passed a Marquette decision in 1978, banks were now allowed to charge up to the interest rates allowed by the state in which they were located in. This meant that if the bank was located in South Dakota, it could now charge up to that state's cap, regardless of where the customer lived. Effectively, the anti-usury laws from any state became meaningless. Then the Supreme Court decision on the Smiley versus Citibank case in 1996 was like cuffs tightening on our wrist. The ruling made possible late fees as high as $39, interest rates that 5x after falling behind on just one payment. Duncan A. MacDonald, a former general counsel of Citibank's credit card division, said, "I certainly didn't imagine that someday we might have ended up creating Frankenstein. It got to the point that Citibank was one of the most profitable companies by the early 2000s. Low-hanging fruit. These laws didn't only directly impact the interest rate and the different types of fees you could be charged, it funded the bank's appetite to extend credit to young, impressionable students who lack discipline. Statistically, students are more likely to miss payments, which would allow the banks to raise the interest rates and tack on those enslaving late fees. You see, they essentially trapped the future middle class into debt early on, creating debt addicts for life. Many need debt to finish school, debt for daily purchases, debt to get to and from work, and more debt to afford a roof over their heads. I can't think of another country that has relied so heavily on credit. When you think about it, consumer credit built this country, and consumer credit will probably tear it down. There is a reason why some of the wealthiest families come from banking. It's an amazing business. Underneath all the technicalities, there is a basic truth. Hand someone money, attach a high enough interest rate, and essentially they are yours. There is no product to manufacture or shipping to deal with. All you have to do is sit back and your debt slaves will work 40 hours a week or more for a majority of their life to pay off the debt. Addicted to the things that innocent looking card will allow someone to buy, it will fool them to make that one purchase they didn't have the discipline to save up for. Filled with the closet of things they don't wear, a room with items collecting dust, vacations that extend long after they are over, and the whole thing becomes even more sinister when you start to think about the public school system continuing to fail to implement financial literacy into their curriculum. It's almost as if the system needs a certain amount of people to remain enslaved just to function. Today, credit cards have become so intertwined into the very fabric of American culture that it's almost un-American to not have a credit card and some debt on it. The banks have never been happier to let you accumulate debt with all the interest that they've pre-approved you to fall into. So whose fault is it? An MIT study in 2021 showed that using your credit card served to step on the gas by putting cost out of mind, regardless of the price of the product. More specifically, the study revealed that credit cards drive greater purchasing by sensitizing reward networks in the brain involving the same dopaminergic reward center that is exploited by addictive drugs like cocaine and amphetamines. When you take a bird's eye view of the last 100 years, there is no doubt credit cards was a type of financial cancer that played a major role in plummeting the average household savings rate, creating an I want it now sense of entitlement, breaking families apart, and making us more materialistic than in any other time in history. But personally, it's empowering to believe in taking ownership and responsibility for everything that happens to you, regardless of whether you can control it or not. I personally believe in God, and I believe He wants me to accept the challenge and come out having learned the lesson. One of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, said, "Rather go to bed supperless than rise in debt." Consider subscribing for more stories about business, politics, and money. I think you'll really like one of these too. The previews are playing below the thumbnails. See you in the next one. The last 30 years have been marked by trading what works with what sounds good. And perhaps the company that may be at the center of this is a company the person to the right of you and to the left of you has never heard of. BlackRock. BlackRock was Vanguard. It's anti-Wall Street, but that didn't stop it from becoming the second largest money manager in the world with $8 trillion in assets under management.